that society went through a process of organic change, gradual social changes that advanced society for the better. For example, urbanisation and industrialisation both led to social changes that impacted on where people lived and where they worked. However, Durkheim noticed that the rapid social changes that accompanied the period after the Industrial Revolution had led to many unwanted changes in society. As society lost the function of organic solidarity and shifted towards more mechanical or engineered solidarity through institutions such as education. Durkheim suggested that the experiences of modern society had impacted on social cohesion, with undesirable effects of mass urbanisation such as poverty, mental illness and crime, leading society towards a state of anomie, a drift away from the norms and values of society. However, Durkheim suggested that the criminality and deviance that accompanied these social changes was actually a normal part of a healthy and functioning society. He suggested that crime was inevitable in modern society, and that a certain level of crime was actually desirable for society. Too much crime, however, would lead society's norms and values to atrophy or decay. Too little deviance and society would be incapable of change, and eventually growth would stagnate. Durkheim therefore argued that society performed both positive and negative functions for society, and at an optimal level, deviance was desirable. But how can crime be positive for society? Well, this is achieved through boundary maintenance. Durkheim suggested that social reactions to criminal behaviour help to reinforce the value consensus of society. Extreme criminality, such as the murder of women or children, would unite others in society to condemn those that had committed the crime. He actively reinforced people's belief in the collective conscience of society, that is, its moral code. As people condemn wrongdoers, it leads to a collective agreement that the criminal or deviant behaviour is wrong and should not be repeated. It acts as a form of informal social control over others, considering deviance as society's reaction to the crime is seen as a disincentive. Now, we can use this example in contemporary society. Public reactions in recent years to terrorist activities in London and Manchester can be seen as a form of boundary maintenance. Public displays of grief and defiance against terrorist activities, backed up with media campaigns, reinforces the will of the people to not let terrorists win. Furthermore, in the summer of 2011, nationwide riots after the shooting of Mark Duggan in London led to public condemnation of those that were rioting and looting. Media images that displayed the extent of the damage caused led to people proposing more extreme measures to combat rioters, including the use of police water cannons. This reinforces the collective conscience that the behaviour witnessed is not to be tolerated in society, and these attitudes are often reinforced when footage of other protests are shown on TV. A further positive function of crime and deviance suggested by Durkheim is adaptation and change. Deviant behaviour is a way of people demonstrating that attitudes are changing towards the established social order, and Durkheim believed that these served as a positive function. As smaller groups in society deviate, they attract the following of others, and the norms and values of society are gradually changed. In some instances, this occurs quite rapidly. However, it is often a gradual process as these new behaviours become the norm for more people and cease to be deviant as society accepts these behaviours as a new norm. For example, the civil rights movement in the USA began with sit-ins and protests in white-only establishments and gained momentum, which led to the repeal of the Jim Crow laws. The gay rights movement accelerated after the riots at the Stonewall Cafe, and the women's liberation movement gained momentum by using unconventional means to push for equality with men. A contemporary example of this is the removal of the statue of slave trader Edward Colston in Bristol, which was subsequently followed by the removal of other symbols of slavery across the globe. Other functions of crime suggested by Durkheim included the idea that crime acted as a safety valve for society, that mass demonstrations are a warning sign that society is drifting towards anomie, whilst others, such as Polsky and Davis, have suggested that some forms of deviance, such as prostitution and pornography, can act as a form of social release for society, relieving tensions that otherwise would be channeled into criminal activities. We need to be able to evaluate Durkheim's views of crime and deviance. Firstly, Durkheim's ideas can be seen to have relevance to contemporary society, and his concepts of boundary maintenance and deviance as a form of social change are part of his lasting legacy to sociology. However, there are problems with his work. Defining the optimum level of crime in society is problematic. How much is too much? And secondly, Durkheim offers little explanation as to how crime occurs other than to suggest it is due to frustrations. We can also argue that in contemporary society that deviant behaviours seem to have less effect than in previous generations. For example, protests over climate change have been met with widespread condemnation by the media rather than meaningful social change. Similarly, Black Lives Matter protests in the USA have not always been met with social change, but rather by attempts to nullify and sensationalise issues. In this instance, Durkheim's argument that there will be a reasonable reaction by society to social change can be criticised by actions of the media and the state in attempting to ensure the status quo.